Yet another BEAD mandate riding on the Accelerating Broadband Permits Act in Congress. North Dakota wraps up its BEAD deployment contracts. The FCC's digital equity rule struck down by the U.S. Court of Appeals. A large acquisition for Lumen, and remembering the legend that was Ted Turner. Those stories and more on This Week in the Broadband Universe. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Craig Corbett. Commerce Department officials may soon have additional responsibilities for tracking how BEAD projects are progressing. That's if the Accelerating Broadband Permits Act makes its way successfully through Congress. On Thursday, the legislation was introduced by Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, with co-sponsorship from Senators Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat from New Mexico, and John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming. The bill would require Commerce and NTIA to create a public online dashboard for tracking information such as the amount of awarded funds that have been spent and the number of locations that have been connected using BEAD grant funds. In addition, NTIA Administrator Ariel Roth would be directed to assist executive agencies improve compliance with statutory deadlines via interagency communications, along with improving both communications and processing through the use of new applications. There would also be a provision for early warning systems to identify permitting delays, streamlined reviews, and a clearer definition of which broadband projects actually require a full environmental impact evaluation. The bill has been referred to the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. North Dakota's Department of Information Technology this week announcing full execution of contracts with BEK Communications Cooperative and Midco, the service providers that will bring broadband to areas of the state that are still unconnected. As a result of aggressive broadband build-outs over recent years, North Dakota has only a couple hundred unserved locations remaining. Midco and BEK Communications will now turn to permitting, engineering, and construction on their fiber-centric projects, all BEAD-funded locations expected to be completed in North Dakota by the end of 2027. Big news from NVIDIA and Corning, with word of a long-term partnership expected to strengthen AI infrastructure. Corning will expand U.S. optical connectivity capacity by a factor of 10 and will build 3 new manufacturing plants in Texas and North Carolina, a move expected to create more than 3,000 high-paying jobs. Corning's U.S. fiber production capacity will expand by more than 50% in order to meet demand driven by AI factory build-outs. A filing with the Securities Exchange Commission showed that NVIDIA invested $500 million in the company, along with securing rights to buy an additional $2.7 billion in Corning stock in the future. Google, Microsoft, and xAI have agreed to share early versions of their artificial intelligence programs with the U.S. government for assessment prior to releasing the models to the public. The Commerce Department's Center for AI Standards and Innovation will evaluate the programs to test capabilities and security. 40 evaluations have already been completed, including on models not yet released. A similar agreement with the Commerce Department was reached with Anthropic and ChatGPT maker OpenAI in 2024. Elsewhere, Dish Wireless has agreed to pay $17 million to resolve an investigation that it signed up ineligible consumers in order to take part in a COVID pandemic-era program that provided subsidized broadband services to millions of Americans. Congress allocated $17 billion to assist lower-income families affected by COVID-19 with a $30 per month voucher toward paying for internet service. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit has struck down the digital equity rule put in place by the FCC under former Chair Jessica Rosenworcel. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 required the FCC to adopt rules preventing digital discrimination of access to broadband by consumers. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit issued a finding that the Rosenworcel FCC overstepped the limits of its statutory authority. $27 million in USDA funding is being made available to improve access to remote education and health care in rural communities. The U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development is inviting grant applications through June 30th under Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant Program. Lumen has agreed to acquire cloud native network as a service platform Alkira in a $475 million cash deal. Lumen's current network as a service provides north-south traffic. That's connectivity between on-premise environments and cloud providers. Alkira addresses east-west traffic. Now that's between clouds and data centers. Warner Brothers Discovery made its Q1 earnings report this week. Net loss $2.9 billion. That figure includes $1.3 billion in pre-tax acquisition-related expenses related to the Paramount acquisition. Also takes into consideration the $2.8 billion termination fee paid to Netflix when Paramount ended its agreement over the Time Warner Brothers deal. And finally, a few thoughts on the man who redefined cable television and the media, Ted Turner, who passed away this week at the age of 87. I was fortunate to have met him many years ago, and he was just as most thought him to be, larger than life in so many ways, but humble enough to ride Marta through Atlanta and regularly stop to pick up trash off the streets. Ted truly was one of a kind. Not sure we'll ever see the likes of that force of nature, who went from earning the nickname Captain Outrageous as he skippered the U.S. entry Courageous to victory in the 37th America's Cup. That was a 4-0 sweep referred to as, quote, resounding and tactically brilliant, all the way to creating Captain Planet and the Planeteers, the animated series that encouraged youngsters to think about conservation and climate responsibility. Of course, Ted turned the world of cable television news on its head with the creation of CNN and its audacious 24-hour-a-day news coverage, Superstation TBS, and its ubiquitous coverage of the Atlanta Braves from coast to coast, and then TNT and Turner Classic Movies, Cartoon Network, and on and on. And don't forget the Goodwill Games that Turner created in 1986 as an alternative to the Olympics and those Cold War-era boycotts. He founded World Championship Wrestling, owned the Atlanta Hawks, the Atlanta Braves, and was as competitive as they come. But more importantly, Ted Turner was an unbelievably generous philanthropist. His $1 billion pledge to the United Nations in 1997 was at the time one of the largest charitable donations ever made. And he was known to twist the arms of fellow billionaires, telling them it was beyond time for them to start giving away some of their money. Ted was one of the most visionary supporters of the National Wildlife Federation. He saw the need to save the American bison, a species that had dwindled to fewer than 1,000, and invested heavily in growing the bison population to more than 400,000 today. Of that, Turner's 45,000 head of bison, the largest single herd in the world. Ted Turner was a man who made a difference in so many different ways. Godspeed, Ted Turner.